Aibosh Vish, Chateau Nadiskia Yassir, Daila Vish Sabuna Naskia Date, Vashla e Vishka Sloya Vanoi, Kon Nadiskia Unvara. The Germans passed through Brussels and were closing in on the Marne. The weeks of invulnerability were in full effect, and especially on the Eastern Front, this myth would reign true. The French were in scrambles, and of course their allies in the east, the Russians, would have their major defeat as well. The Schlieffen plan wasn't working as well as the Germans thought in the east, however, as the Russians were mobilizing ahead of time. The Russian steamroller was on the move. The people of the Tsarist army, the Poles, the Belarusians, the Finnish, the Azerbaijanis, the Ukrainians, the Balkan states, the people of the steppe, the Wild Division, and of course the savage Cossacks, and even the women were ready to fight for the Tsar. The Tsar's army's greatest weakness, however, was the slowness of mobilization of the people as far as Japan to as close as Petrograd. They managed to make and activate Plan 19, however, and they amassed on the Galician front with the Austro-Hungarians, but the Germans were another story. The swiftness of the Russian mobilization meant that the Germans only had 2 armies to hold off the Russian invasion. The Germans were shocked as they moved into East Prussia. Cossacks and wild Kossarians stormed the lands of East Prussia, as the Germans feared in retreat quickly. Now the heel was on the other foot, as the Germans were facing the hardships and atrocities committed by the Belgians, with the slaughter on the Eastern Front. The fear of the savages from the east, the killer nature of the Cossacks, the people from the steppe, drove the Germans to be refugees as they ran from them. This was the first mass deportation of citizens in their own country, but this would not be the last. The day the Germans moved into Brussels, their armies were defeated at Gorbin, Tannenberg, and the capital of East Prussia was next. On the 23rd of August, the Russians were now at Tannenhall, but this would be the last victory until 1915. The Germans quickly messaged the German army and the German leaders to help quickly defend the city of Tannenberg, and 2 men rose to the challenge, Erich Ludendorff and Paul von Hindenburg. On a battlefield of a front of 100 miles wide, they shaped a daring plan. The Russian Second Army was dangerously far ahead of the First Army, and the Missouri lakes that parted them from joining up or even making it difficult to communicate, or even losing a major attack together, and the generals, well, they did not like each other anyway. The Germans would use the Prussian railway system to great effect, and encircle the armies of the First Army, and they would be encircled at the city of Tannenberg. There was a German general with a French name, Francois, a Russian general with a German name, Rennenkamp, a German general with a Scottish name, von Mackensen, and finally the Russian general with a tragic name and a tragic end, Samsonov. Samsonov's cavalry detected the German build-up on their left, so he ordered reinforcements to extend the Russian line, but that would take hours or even days for them to arrive. True to his word, on August 26, Francois advanced the part of his 1st Division towards the Russian outpost at 8 p.m, but at 3:45 p.m, Francois halted his attack to organize a strong attack on the following day by men with full stomachs and ammunition pouches. Schluch followed his orders, where he would make sure the Russians would not slip past his flanks, which would make it difficult to spring a trap. So on his right, he attacked to push back the Russian 2nd Division and almost destroyed it. On his left, the German 3rd Reserve Division repelled an attack by the Russian 5th Corps. It was a different story in the thinly held center, where the Russian 13th Corps advanced towards the road center of Allenstein almost unopposed. Zelensky was visited by the commander of the Russian army, the Grand Duke Nicholas Nikolaevich of Russia, who ordered him to support Samsonov. Therefore, Rennenkamp ordered his 2 corps to invest in Tannenberg, while the 2 were on the march to make contact with Samsonov. These orders were sent by wireless in the clear. The next day, the Russian 1st Cavalry started riding towards the 2nd Army, but their infantry waited for resupply. That evening, the 8th Army staff was on the edge. Little had been achieved during the day, when they had intended to spring the trap. The 20th Army had did well on another Toroid day, but then they were exhausted on the last day. On their far left, they knew that the 17th Corps and the 1st Reserve Corps were coming into action, but headquarters had learned little about their progress. In fact, the 17th German Corps had defeated the Russian 6th Corps, who fled back along the roads. The 17th Corps had endured long marches in the sweltering heat, but some men had the energy to pursue on bicycles, requisitioned from the civilians. To add to their worries, German aerial scouts reported that some of Samsonov's army was detrained on its railhead. Another aviation mistake was reported that Rennenkamp's infantry was now heading towards them. The 8th Army might be in the trap. Hoffman, who had been an observer with the Japanese in Manchuria, tried to ease their nerves by telling how Samsonov and Rennenkamp had called during the war, so they would do nothing to help one another. This was a good story that Hoffman had treasured and retold so frequently, so it reappears in many histories, but not in either Hindenburg's or Ludendorff's memoirs for some reason. Francois was ready to attack the Russian left decisively on the 27th of August, hitting the Russian First Corps. His artillery barrage was so overwhelming, soon he had to take the key town of Unstein. In the center, the Russians continued strongly to attack the Germans' 10th Corps and moved northwards towards Allenstein. The German 17th Corps and the German 1st Reservist Corps pushed the Russian right wing further back. Commanding the Russian First Army, General Vasily Gurko was told later that Samsonov did not know what was happening on his flanks, because he was observing the actions from a rise in the ground distance from which his wireless set and reports were not relayed to him. He was late in the day before he realized that his army was in frightful danger. On the morning of the 28th of August, the German commanders were motoring all along the front when they were shown a report of the aerial observer that Rennenkampf was moving towards their rear. Ludendorff announced that they would attack the Second Army and it must be broken off. Hindenburg led him behind a nearby hedge where they emerged. Hindenburg calmly said that the operations would continue as planned. Before long, they learned that the report of the Rennenkampf's movement was a mistake. Samsonov's 1st Corps on the left and the 6th Corps on the right were both retreating. His center had received little food and ammunition, so that they would be unable to keep attacking. They were ordered to retreat southeast to obtain what they needed to fight. Samsonov asked that Rennenkampf would order to help, but it would be too late. Francois by this time had advanced due east, moving further than his orders specified, to form a line south of the Russians between Nuremberg and Willenberg. The German 17th Corps had swung southwest to meet him. The noose was in the place. The Russians who had been attacking were now surrounded. On the 29th, the troops of the Russian Second Army Center would be retreating south, and they ran into the German defensive lines. These Russians who tried to break through by dashing across the open fields of the heavy corps were mowed down by machine guns. They were in the cauldron, center of Fröninger, east of Tannenberg, and throughout the day they were relentlessly pounded by artillery. Many surrounded, low columns of prisoners jammed into the roads away from the battlefields. Hindenburg and Ludendorff watched from the hilltop with only a single field telephone line. Thereafter, they stayed close to the telephone network. Hindenburg met one captured Russian corps commander that day and another day after that, and following that day and that day. On the 30th of August, the Russians remaining outside of the cauldron tried unsuccessfully to break open the snare, but it was too late. The noose was already tightening. Rather than report the losses to his army of the Tsar, Nicholas II, Samsonov disappeared into the woods that night and committed suicide. His body was found during the following years and returned to Russia by the Red Cross in Germany. On the 31st of August, Hindenburg formally reported to the Kaiser that the 3 Russian army corps, the 13th, the 15th, and the 23rd, had now been destroyed. The 2 corps, the 1st and the 6th, had been not caught in the cauldron, but had been severely bloodied and were now on the retreat back to Poland. He requested that the battle would be named Tannenberg. It was basically a toss-up between who wanted it. Either Ludendorff or Hoffmann claimed to be their own design, but it proved strong. And so ends the greatest Russian defeat of the whole entire war, and maybe the greatest defeat in military history. Samsonov's Second Army had been almost annihilated, 93,000 captured, 78,000 killed or wounded, and almost 10,000, most of them retreating from the flanks, barely escaping with their lives. The Russians had lost 350 big guns. The Germans suffered 12,000 casualties out of a manpower of 1,500 men committed to the battle. 60 trains were required to take the captured Russian equipment to Germany, and so the roundup is, the Germans quickly moved to cut off Samsonov on the foot of the Battle of Tannenberg, and Tannenberg had begun. So it took 5 days to end, but the Germans were victorious and made the Second Army into a wreck. 90,000 Russians were taken prisoner, rounded up like the Jewish pogroms. Samsonov said these infamous words before he shot himself in the woods. So now that East Prussia was saved from the savages of the East, the Cossacks did not burn down their homes, the Russians did not rape their women, and of course the Mile Division did not even loot a single house, and the war moved onward, upward, and eastward. So the sleeping plan was now ironed itself out, and the sleeping plan would now be active in the East. And so that's it. That is the Battle of Tannenberg. Yeah, I actually wrote from a documentary, but I took the battle from the Wikipedia, so sorry. Anyway, that was pretty good, honestly. I survived it. The effects on Tannenberg are actually very significant, because it actually started the stabbing the myth back, because it was like, we defeated the Russians with only 1,500 people. The German might of the army was strong, and the Jewish people and the people of high political status stabbed us in the back. and that's how Hitler kind of had the same idea as well, because he was in the German army. So Tannenberg is prolific, and the cultural repercussions and actually the cultural significance of Tannenberg is that, of course, there's Tannenberg, the World War One FPS. Of course, there's a game where you, I think it's Time Splitters, where you actually go back to the Battle of Tannenberg. I think you're on the German side though, and of course there are other historical things to Tannenberg. There's actually a monument in Germany that is still erect because it's the First World War, not the Third Reich. So I believe it should still be erect because it's the the First World War. There were no real bad guys in the First World War, and let's see. I think that's the cultural significance. Of course, it's a very big pride thing in Germany, the Battle of Tannenberg, especially all the way up to the 1980s and stuff like that. So the Battle of Tannenberg lives on even 100 years, well, 104 years, honestly, because this is the last year of World War One centennials. And that reminds me, I should start getting some centennials done. I haven't done one in a while. But the Americans are now coming into full force, and Foch said, "We will not attack until the full might of the American forces are here." And I don't know why I did not, like, sound like a French person, but that's it. Anyway, I hope you learned something. 40 minutes. I don't know, I might record something else, because it's not going to take years to come through, but honestly, I don't think I might have enough footage, but there you go. The Battle of Tannenberg, the most famous battle of World War One, the deadliest defeat, the most destructive defeat, and the worst defeat ever devised by man. The Battle of Tannenberg. Learn something, my dudes and my dudettes. Yeah, it's just probably stop dragging this on. Later.